I respect this man, and I have talked about how much I do respect him as a person, as a dude, and as a director. I like a lot of his movies. I just don't like his DCEU. And this is exactly why I love and respect Zack Snyder so much, because he is a grown-ass man. He's actually talking to people like my friends talk to me and I talk to my friends. He's talking to you like you're a normal human being, because that's who Zack Snyder is. And I really, really appreciate this guy so much.
We're really not affiliated with Geeks and Gamers as far as I'm concerned, and there's no room for hate.
What I just listened to Zack Snyder do to me, and I do believe he slandered me.
So we've all enjoyed a good laugh at Zack Snyder going on the Geeks and Gamers live stream and essentially saying he doesn't have anything to do with them, especially after they arranged this stuff. You know, one of my favourite moments covering anti-SJW-ness in the last couple months. But I was thinking more lately, like, why do these guys think Zack Snyder is, like, one of them? Why do they think he is, like, some right-wing reactionary? And Zack Snyder has recently given an interview and he talked about his own personal politics. So what I want to do in this video is talk about what he said and then compare it to like his movies and why people interpret his movies a certain way and why he might attract, you know, a certain fan to his body of work. But before we get any further, a lot of my work on this channel is demonetized because when you're covering more serious, sometimes edgier topics, YouTube doesn't like this. So if you've ever enjoyed my work, please consider becoming a patron. And you don't have to pledge a crazy amount. I want to build up my Patreon based on as many people as possible, pledging little amounts like $1 or $2. So if you feel like I have ever brought anything that's worthwhile into your life and my content, please really consider becoming a patron to help me continue to do this regardless of if YouTube monetize or not most of my videos in a given month. Also, if you want to join our communities, come check out our Discord and my subreddit. Those links in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, please check out the Kavernacle at Twitter, at Instagram, and also my personal Reddit where you can keep up to date with all my content and what I'm doing. Also, we are slowly chugging along to 35k. Hopefully by the end of June we will get there and we can add another chocolate orange to this lovely pyramid. I get a chocolate orange for every 5k, so help me get there. Also, I live stream 2 times a week, Tuesday and Thursday. The stream archives go on my second channel, the Kavernacle Extra. Please go check out all that stuff. But now into Zack Snyder. So obviously the Snyder Cut was a big fan movement because of the disaster which was the Justice League film, which essentially was split up between Snyder and Joss Whedon. Lots of people didn't like the contrasting tone in the film itself, what Whedon actually did with Snyder's vision, and because Snyder left that film because of a personal tragedy, so they eventually released a 4-hour version. I didn't watch that, I'm not going to waste my time with that stuff. I don't personally like many Zack Snyder films, but people generally liked it, and they liked Zack Snyder. But part of this fan movement also encompassed anti-SJW right-wing nerd media, and they were part of this campaign to get the Snyder Cut released.
Two people that I can't even imagine how good it feels to be them today because of the long-awaited, the long battle, the announcement of the Snyder Cut. I've seen this concerted effort from a lot of these far-left people, the Blue Checkmark Brigade, and it just seems like the existence, the mere mention of the existence of the Snyder Cut really, really upsets them.
So like I showed you at the start, they then had Zack Snyder on the Geeks and Gamers live stream, which was a charity live stream. And Zack Snyder basically said he doesn't really have anything to do with them because of the reactionary politics they often push on their platform.
Really not affiliated with Geeks and Gamers as far as I'm concerned, and there's no room for hate.
This obviously came after them praising him for months and even years.
And Zack Snyder loves his fans.
Predictably, the backlash was pretty satisfying as well.
Out there, I went out of my way when this entire thing started to tell Zack, you might want to understand what's about to happen by being connected to me.
Further in the stream, did he co-sign or did he speak positively, specifically of Geeks and Gamers, knowing damn well that you guys raised the money? Did he bother to make that statement, say thanks to the Geeks and Gamers team for helping us raise all this money? No. But what he did do was make sure that he wanted to separate that.
It's my stream, and I've been slandered with Geeks and Gamers enough tonight, and no matter who we're talking to after what I just listened to Zack Snyder do to me, and I do believe he slandered me.
As luck would have it, less than a week ago, Zack Snyder actually spoke about his personal politics. So I feel like we should start with that, and we'll talk about what he has said, and then we'll get into his filmography and why the themes of his films attract a certain element. So Zack Snyder given an interview to The Guardian before his new film came out, Army of the Dead. So Zack Snyder, I don't have a right-wing political agenda. People see what they want to see. So Sarah Poley, actor Dawn of the Dead, asks, a lot of people see a right-wing political undercurrent in some of your films. Where do you stand politically, and has that changed over the years? Bonus hint, don't evade the question. Love you. So he says, I vote Democrat. I am a true lover of individual rights. So remember that. I've always been a super strong advocate of women's rights and a woman's right to choose, and I've always been surrounded by powerful women. And of course, I'm a huge advocate for the rights of all ethnicities and every walk of life. I would say I'm a pretty liberal guy. I want to make sure everyone's heard and everyone feels included. I don't have a right-wing political agenda. People see what they want to see. For me, that was certainly not the point. So he probably is pretty liberal in terms of who he votes and stuff. So one more bit from this interview. So throughout your movies, especially the ones from the DC universe, you include a lot of visual cues and reference to Christianity. Is that intentional? Yeah, I think the philosophical Christian identity of the West lives through a lot of these DC characters. Superman personifies a lot of those same qualities we see in the mythological story of Christ in his death and rebirth. Sometimes it's easier to evoke those things through imagery. So, that's a little insight into his politics and views on religion. Now, I talk about individual rights because many speculate, and it seems to be true, that Zack Snyder is a big fan of Ayn Rand. So we've been speaking about Ayn Rand a lot on this channel lately because we've been talking about Bioshock and stuff. But Ayn Rand obviously advocates for, this really pure form of free market capitalism and this objectivism philosophical ideology. And to prove this point, maybe... So in 2018, it was announced that Zack Snyder's next project is an adaptation of The Fountainhead. So Snyder was apparently doing a Q&A on the site Vero, according to Deadline, when he told a fan that his next project would be The Fountainhead adaptation. The Rand novel has apparently been on Snyder's adaptation list for quite some time. I've always felt like The Fountainhead was such a thesis on the creative process and what it is to create something, he told The Hollywood Reporter in 2016. Warner Brothers owns Ayn Rand's script, and I've just been working on that a little bit. So it does seem like he likes Ayn Rand, and although maybe he's not a terrible person, Ayn Rand was a terrible person. But I feel like this is interesting in the context of his Watchmen adaptation. Now, I'm not a big fan of this film, and I saw it years and years ago, so it's not very clear in my mind, but I've been reading a lot about Rorschach and the character, and I absolutely love the HBO Watchmen adaptation. Kind of sad it was only 9 episodes in one series, but it was so good, let's just, leave it alone, I guess. But Rorschach was actually like a satire of Ayn Rand style superheroes. But what Zack Snyder sort of did in the Watchmen movie is he made the character Rorschach like this cool anti-hero. And the point of his character wasn't meant to be like something in comparison to like the Punisher or something, like where you kind of meant to root for him. He's meant to be a bit of a loser and unhinged. And Alan Moore, who obviously wrote the graphic novel, which the movie is based on, said this about Rorschach, saying, I wanted to make Rorschach as like, this is what Batman would be in the real world, but I have forgotten that actually a lot of comic book fans smelling not having a girlfriend, these are actually kind of heroic. So Rorschach became the most popular character in Watchmen. I made him to be a bad example, but I have people come up to me in the street saying, I am Rorschach. That is my story. And I'd be thinking, yeah, great. Could you keep away from me? Never come anywhere near me as long as I live. So that is quite funny. Alan Moore has, lots of funny takes. He's very, very left-wing. I think he's a left-wing libertarian or something. Now, Polygon did a good article about what Rorschach was intended to be. And it is meant to be like a satire of Rand. So then it's not very surprising that maybe Zack Snyder either kind of missed the point or thought Rorschach is this satire of Ayn Rand style superheroes, but I'm going to change that because I don't want him to be a satire. I want him to be cool. Or maybe someone who likes Ayn Rand, this guy just is fundamentally cool. So the article says, Alan Moore created Rorschach to dunk on Randian superheroes. So Rorschach is based on Mr. A. Rorschach owes his ideals, visual design, and violence to a couple of other characters who are doing the late 80s Batman thing way before Batman, namely the vigilante detectives known as The Question and Mr. A. Mr. A first appeared in a 1967 issue of the Underground Comics anthology series Wit's End, a vigilante who wore an impassive steel mask and a wardrobe of 1940s private detective, a fedora suit and tie, but all in white. Less than a year later, the Question came on the scene as a backup feature in Blue Beetle. He was a vigilante who also dressed like a 1940s private detective and wore a pseudoderm mask that made him appear to be entirely without facial features. But unlike his other Silver Age comic contemporaries, he'd leave the occasional criminal to drown if he felt like they deserved it. The Question and Mr. A were both from the pen writer-artist Steve Ditko, one of the co-creators of Spider-Man. The reason they seem so similar is that The Question was simply Ditko's attempt to make Mr. A into Comic Code's restrictions, which would make him a more lucrative project. Both characters were Ditko's way of expressing his politics through the superhero metaphor. So Ditko was an avowed objectivist, following the philosophy first espoused by Ayn Rand, which rejects altruism for the individualistic platform that man's moral obligation is to achieve his own happiness and act as his own judgment determines. Therefore, unobstructed free capitalism is the only moral society, and the only role of the government is to provide police, armed forces, and objective courts. With Mr. A and The Question, Ditko sought to express that philosophy through fiction, much as Rand herself had done with novels like The Fountainhead, that Snyder wants to make into a film, and Atlas Shrugged, which is satirized by Bioshock, and naturally with superhero comics as his genre of choice, that meant that Mr. A and Ditko's Question were dealers of objectivist justice. Fools will tell you that there can be no honest person, Mr. A tells the reader in one story. There are no blacks or whites, that everyone is grey. When one knows what is black, evil, and what is white, good, there can be no justification for choosing any part of evil. Those who do so are not grey, but black and evil. They will be treated accordingly. In another Mr. A story, Ditko presents a hippie in tattered clothes and hair as the enemy of the good, as the man exhorts the masses to follow his brotherhood of the collective. We must banish individual selfishness, rights, property, and good. There is no one truth, but a truth that works for the common good. No differences are important. Better or worse is a cruel hoax. All must blend into equality. Ignore impotent reason and logic, forget right or wrong. Ditko's implication is that the altruistic push for equality, peace, and the haves helping out the have-nots is a path to a slave-like society. The bamboozled men taken in by the hippies' words agree. Some guys never learn to compromise, to give in, stubborn, won't listen to reason, greedy, won't share their good fortune. They need a practical lesson in getting along with people. It's not hard to see the path from Mr. A to Rorschach, who refused to compromise even in the face of Armageddon. So Rorschach is a big finger to objectivism. Moore has minced no words about he never intended Rorschach to be a laudable hero, which is what I referenced at the start of this bit. And over the years, he's also talked about his opinion of Ditko's openly Randian leanings. He says, I have to say, I found Ayn Rand's philosophy laughable. Her ideas didn't really appeal to me, but they seemed to be the kind of ideas that people would espouse. People who might secretly believe themselves to be part of the elite and not part of the excluded majority. Moore and Gibbons' Rorschach isn't the shining example of the philosophy that Mr. A represents. Rather than exhibiting objective moral beliefs about every person's right to pursue their own happiness, his closest allies find him at best off-putting and hard to get along with. Contrary to Randian reasoning, his commitment to his ideals has not brought him personal success or happiness. And then Moore told BBC that, we realised Rorschach wouldn't survive the book. It just became obvious. We realised that he was a character. If ever there was a character that had a king-size death wish, he was in pain, psychological pain, every moment of his life, and he wanted out of it, but with honour, in whatever his own twisted standards of honour might have been. So it's quite funny, the original creators of Rorschach depicted him as a loser who kind of went out in his own blaze of glory, but he didn't fulfill like this Randian objectivist, I guess, goal of personal fulfillment through pursuing your own selfish morality and stuff like that. So it's quite funny that Zack Snyder turned him into a kind of admirable anti-hero rather than what Moore describes him as. So that is one way you could imagine these reactionary types could like Zack Snyder, and why they don't understand, I guess, the character in Watchmen and generally what Watchmen is about, because Zack Snyder's film essentially takes something that is super left-leaning and kind of makes it more centrist with some sort of, you know, Randian overtones as well. And obviously a lot of these fans were extremely mad at the TV show Watchmen, where the nationalist villains were all inspired by the ramblings and ravings of Rorschach that he put down in his own diary, and they all wear the Rorschach mask. So it's pretty clear that another interpretation of his character that Damon Lindelof had, who created the Watchmen show, was this guy could easily be interpreted as this extremely reactionary right-wing villainous character, especially his ideology. And I guess the show is more true to like the wokeness of Watchmen, but just complaining about Watchmen going woke is completely laughable when you hear the creator's own politics. But just staying on the topic of superheroes, I guess that's another thing. Like we said, you know, in multiple videos, nerd media, especially online, has become dominated by reactionary anti-SJWs and people who are extremely right-leaning. So that's how they will take someone like Zack Snyder and praise him all the time, talk about the Snyder Cut being some sort of, you know, anti-SJW movement, only for him to come on their own show and talk about how he's not associated with them. But you can see through things like Rorschach and generally his work on superhero movies, you can see why these people might like him. But I think an even bigger one is 300. Now, 300, I'll admit, I liked growing up, mainly because I'm just a sucker for like history stuff and like war movies. But at the same time, this is like ultra stylized, based on Frank Miller's work, about the Spartan Battle of Thermopylae, where in legend, it's, you know, 300 Spartans against hordes of Persians trying to conquer Sparta as the Persians advance throughout Greece and stuff. I'm going to talk about how this is problematic, just in general, how the battle's been depicted. But the film itself is like very problematic. Of course, it being released during all the Western conflict in the Middle East doesn't help these awful stereotypes of a bunch of, you know, chiseled white super macho men fighting like these hordes of Persians. Persia today is, of course, Iran. So there is a bit of subtext there with the conflict in the region as well. Obviously, a lot of Orientalism in that the Spartans, who are depicted as like really white, are the heroes, the macho good guys, where the Eastern people are depicted in an extremely problematic way. And as faceless as people from non-Western countries are often depicted in these films, they even have those immortal guys who literally are like all wearing silver masks. I mean, the character design is pretty cool, but that is like very problematic. Now, this is essentially like a right-wing revisionist history depiction of this battle. And although it's entertaining, highly stylized and all that stuff, it really upholds a lot of right-wing myths about the Battle of Thermopylae, essentially seen as the Greeks' Alamo. Now, there was a good article about why Trump supporters, Golden Dawn, all these different nationalist right-wing groups, why they like 300 and why they like the Battle of Thermopylae. So I thought I'd just read this stuff. And I think this together with Watchmen kind of helps explain why Zack Snyder might have a lot of chuds in his fan base. So Washington Post article written by Ishan Taror, it had a little intro about Golden Dawn and then goes on to say, so describing the battle, beginning with the account of Greek historian Herodotus, the clash which took place in 480 BC has become a kind of foundation myth of Western civilization. The heroic Spartan stand, whose numbers were closer to 7,000 than 300, in the face of the Persian hordes is cast as a primordial act of sacrifice for the liberty of a people. The historical consensus, both among ancient chroniclers and current scholars, was that Thermopylae was a clear Greek defeat. The Persian invasion would be pushed back in later ground and naval battles, but its legacy still reverberates millennia later. So going back to like cinema's history with this battle, so consider the opening narration to the 1962 Hollywood film The 300 Spartans, the cinematic precursor to 300. At a time when the Cold War was in full swing, it set down the stakes of a clash with the East. Across the hush of 24 centuries, this is the story of a turning point in history, of a blazing day when 300 Greek warriors fought here to hold their lives, their freedom, and ours. This is a powerful claim that many in the West accept. Thermopylae is the Alamo of antiquity, a doomed contest between the brave few and a gargantuan foe that stirred their compatriots to action. Had Xerxes, a Persian emperor, snuffed out all Greek resistance, then the scattered city-states on the western side of the Aegean Sea would have just become one more province of what was a vast multi-ethnic empire. What would happen to our supposed Greek inheritance, the principles of democracy and reason? Frank Miller, an American graphic novelist whose work gave rise to the 300 film series, sketched the implication most cruelly with his book, The Army of Persia, a force so vast it shakes the earth with its march, is poised to crush Greece, an island of reason and freedom in the sea of mysticism and tyranny. Whatever the historical merits of this belief, and more on that below, the ghost of Leonidas looms large in the right-wing imagination. Now, if you know anything about Greek history, it's pretty laughable to talk about, like, the Battle of Thermopylae and Sparta being a beacon of freedom and democracy, because Athens is actually the city-state that practices democracy. Sparta doesn't. Sparta is a monarchy. Sparta is essentially a militaristic monarchy, and it has this warrior culture, which is why people love it, and a very brutal way of dealing with children if they're not fit to become soldiers in the Spartan army. Of course, they've been mythicized as these great fighters and everything, but it's pretty laughable to say this group represents the whole of Greece, because also that the Spartans allied themselves with the Persians later to actually fight the Athenians, and the Spartans and Athenians were constantly fighting each other. These guys weren't just, you know, we're Greek and we're the same. Athens was clearly different from Sparta. So, like many of these things we spoke about in history, how people are able to use this stuff in their propaganda is revisionist history. What did the Battle of Thermopylae mean for the West? And we often talk about the Greco-Roman tradition being the foundation of the West, but this is all like revisionist history and really lacks nuance of what different groups in Greece actually practiced and actually believed in. But you can see right there why right-wingers love this stuff, right? You have this macho group of men defending, you know, white Western civilization from the East. And it also places like a monopoly on what is moral. So apparently, if you read 300 in the Battle of Thermopylae in a certain way, the Spartans are more moral than the Athenians, and they're more moral than the Persians, despite the way their society was built and everything. So with 300, you can see why people might like Zack Snyder for making the battle look like this and depicting it in this way, buying into Orientalist tropes in a time where there was serious conflict between the West and the East, in the Middle East, and Iran was obviously like a key player in that, so a bit of geopolitics in there as well. And because so many like nationalist right-wing types like to use this battle in their propaganda, they use the imagery from the film. So if you like this film for certain reasons, you might be inclined to be a Zack Snyder fan as well. If you're more like politically aware and you have more like nuanced film criticisms and realize how often, even if directors don't have certain politics, they're often very influenced by tropes inherent in the industry, like Orientalism is a massive one in the film industry, especially in the West, then you can see why he might have, without trying, made a film that mainly appeals to right-wing people. And there's been stories, even someone said in my live stream chat, when they were overseas in the American military, they would watch 300 and stuff. So overall, Zack Snyder personally in 2021 seems to be some sort of maybe centrist, tiny bit left-leaning libertarian, who obviously likes Ayn Rand to some degree. And the reason that so many fans read into him being more right-wing and rally around him as like a right-wing anti-SJW is because, first of all, nerd media is dominated by these types, and because the Snyder Cut was seen as this like anti-studio movement. It's for the fans, and apparently being for the fans is right-wing these days. That's one part of it. But then you also have Watchmen, which takes a character like Rorschach, which is meant to be a satire of Randian superheroes, and makes him this cool anti-hero. And then you have stuff like 300, which pushes a revisionist narrative about what the Battle of Thermopylae really was, and really depicts the battle in a problematic way that buys into these Orientalist stereotypes of Eastern people. So anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Let me know if you enjoyed this one. Please like the video, maybe share. If you want to find me on social media, at the Kavernacle on Twitter and on Instagram. If you want to join the communities, join the Discord and join the subreddit. That's all in the description. Like I said earlier, check out my Medium. I've written some stuff lately. And anything else? No, that's it. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching. Hopefully Man United have won.